Hey everyone, it's Glitchy here, and today we're going to be talking about the extremely anticipated Resident Evil Requiem, the ninth mainline game in the series and what most are calling the best in the entire franchise. A game that feels like it's the culmination of everything that has come from Resident Evil 7 as well as all the different remakes that Capcom has put out over the last few years. Especially since this game uses Leon as one of the main characters, while also bringing in a brand new one in the form of Grace Ashcroft, which Grace is actually a bit of a nostalgic character since she is the daughter of a Resident Evil character that the franchise hasn't paid any attention to since Resident Evil Outbreak. So to say the very least, let's get right into this with a horrifying Resident Evil Requiem review. So, the game starts out with our new character Grace as she's writing up a report in the FBI office where it's revealed that Raccoon City, which was bombed back in the 90s, is still in quarantine and will be until the end of 2040. Before Grace is whisked away by her boss on a mission to investigate a murder that is following a pattern from an apparent serial killer. And the body was found in the place where Grace's mother, Alyssa, has apparently been murdered. So before I continue with the story, I need to mention just how beautiful this game really is. I had to turn down the settings for the video since OBS didn't really agree, but even with that, I still think this game is easily the best looking game Capcom has put out to date, including games like Monster Hunter Rise, Worlds, as well as Wilds. But as Grace approaches the crime scene, she's met by a police officer who allows her into the crime scene. And as you enter the alleyway, somehow they manage to make a place where it is currently day, as well as in a well-populated city, feel extremely eerie. They did a really good job transferring you from an area that feels completely safe to an area where you don't feel that at all. But being inside the hotel, this entire section honestly gives off vibes from the Silent Hill 2 remake somehow. I think it's just because it takes place inside of a hotel, but it mental maths to me. But as I'm going through, Grace powers through the memories, which we'll find out about later, and finally enters the main portion of the hotel, which has been charred all the way through. But somehow I found out the bathroom hasn't been touched at all, and the maggots in the toilet are completely fine. Thank fuck. I also find a picture of Grace and a key that asks me to head to room 204. Not suspicious at all, so Grace does the sensible thing, pulls out the 9 to make sure anyone who might think this white girl is vulnerable is dead fucking wrong. So going deeper into the hotel, I managed to find my way to an emergency exit, which totally doesn't foreshadow any kind of chase sequence at all, and for the first time since RE7, a new pair of cutters that hasn't been reused. After finally finding room 204, I find an active radio as well as a bed covered in pictures of Grace, which some might say is a little fucking strange. Finding one specifically triggers a flashback section which reveals that some weird ass cult guys were the people who ended up burning down the hotel that Alyssa and Grace were staying in, as well as Alyssa getting stabbed in the neck. I really need to commend Capcom for sections like this because even though it is almost impossible to fail this section, they easily could have mitigated this to a cutscene, which I feel most other developers would have simply done. But Capcom really wants you to feel the fear that characters do, navigating the situations as they are, seeing Grace's first time witnessing multiple people die in front of her, as well as seeing Alyssa leave an item we can find back in the present for the story. But getting back to Grace having a mental breakdown over the picture, somehow the phone in a fucking burnt down hotel starts to ring, but that isn't really important because we need to find what Alyssa hid behind the painting. But it kind of seems like a new guest has checked in since the window that was closed is now mysteriously open. But after getting the file, we find out that the new guest is the cop who is now turned into a zombie after saying he got stung with something. So that's pretty cool. In a true horror movie fashion, Grace somehow gets her jacket stuck on a trolley cart, which makes for a pretty cool section where you actually have to dodge the zombie using a shotgun while maneuvering the cart, which leads into a huge chase sequence where we stab this asshole in the neck, push him out a window onto an open street where there's a bunch of people walking by, but at least we're in the fire escape we saw earlier, and there's a weird sound coming from upstairs, which leads us to the main villain of this game being Victor, who is just aura-farming with his badass alligator skin coat and his weird ass glasses, and I've gotta say, out of the recent Resident Evil villains, he's easily my favorite design-wise. Besides, one 9-foot tall vampire. But with this section being done, that means we can finally move on to our first section with Leon, who has also been investigating bodies that apparently have strange black blotches on them. And the weird part is they're also apparently Raccoon City survivors. But this section also shows us very key differences between Grace and Leon. As Leon is hunting down Victor, he starts to infect random people in the city to try and slow Leon down. But Leon is just built a little different from Grace, since Leon's gameplay completely focuses on action compared to Grace, who just completely focuses on horror. And he already starts out with a pistol out in a city that has just barely started going to shit. And Leon is not fucking around, doing all the spin kicks he can, finishing zombies by smashing their heads in with an axe. Leon also gets a lot more ammo than Grace in forms of drops from all the monsters he kills, but Leon also starts out with his revolver, which is named Requiem, and this was literally just put in the game to be the fuck you gun. And after Leon kills all the freaks, we cut back to Grace after finding out he's infected with some strange disease. Grace also isn't in the best scenario, being hung upside down and drained of blood for some reason, where she expertly realized that she could just break out of the clasps using a glass container that she breaks. But somehow she doesn't realize she can just unstrap herself from the things she's on instead of just tipping it over. And it's also a little strange that there's a light flipping mechanic in this game. Surely that won't come up later since we're currently in the horror section. I think I'll just leave that bottle there and explore for now. But I really want to say that this game feels 10 times more scary than the last two mainline games, which, as much as I love RE7 and RE8, RE8 felt a lot more like an action game than this game's horror sections feel. But after a little bit of exploration, I found a key that is actually going to allow us to enter our first save room, which I forgot to mention in the beginning. I actually started this game on classic mode, so I need an item to be able to save at any point during Grace's section, which I would come to regret pretty damn quick at later sections of the game. But after gathering the courage and finally being out of options, I decided to go back to where I saw the rolling bottle. After finding a lighter to defend myself, it only felt like the best option, especially after finding a gaping hole in the ceiling, which seems to be unimportant, especially since there are plenty more in the hallways and a strange book that tells me a creature is in the darkness, plus to stay in the light to be safe. And I'm currently in the pits of hell where not much light reaches. Which, getting to where the bottle was, leads me to one of my main issues with this section, as well as another place we will find later, where we get to engage in what I call cat and mouse horror, which I usually don't really mind in games, but for some reason in this one, it feels especially egregious, especially since these scenarios don't happen often in this game specifically, and this one is scripted as much as physically possible. You don't have a way to stun this enemy, being called the Girl, who has an awesome design, by the way, which I would get if this was an introduction of this character into the main gameplay loop, but she barely shows up in the game, and the parts that she does are easily my least favorite section. Even when she was supposed to be right behind me, she somehow pops out of the fucking ceiling because the game needs to show that she can't go in the light by going into the room that we started this entire section in. It just feels very forced. And after dealing with these kind of scenarios in 4 of the last 5 Resident Evil games, being Jack, Marguerite, Mr. X, Nemesis, Miss Dimitrescu, and the giant fucking fetus in RE8, all of those were well done or were featured in a singular short section. So why the fuck is this game so different? It also doesn't really help that this section is just very irritating to navigate, since you need to send her away just to get a screwdriver so you can get a fuse to enter the next area. But moving on, after getting the fuse, we finally come to our second Leon section, where he was able to track Victor and Ashley to, which is a care center for mentally ill patients, which seems to be Victor's experiment sector for the Umbrella Corporation. It's not long before everything goes to shit after meeting someone who just seems to be a normal worker, before Victor decides to lock the building down and starts an infection process of the whole building, turning all the staff as well as all of the patients And somehow, some of the patients and staff also got access to chainsaws as well, but at least when we kill the zombies, we finally get to give them a taste of their own medicine. And also, a little side note, I love how the little chainsaw just spins on the ground as a hazard before you're able to pick them up. You can definitely have some strategy using these to clear out or knock down enemies before the chainsaw just starts to annihilate everything. And after clearing out all the zombies, we find Grace where we left her as she's being kidnapped by the girl back into the darkness. But thankfully, Leon is all about equal rights and blows that bitch's head smooth off. But after that, Grace and Leon are separated once again after Victor closes a gate between them. Leon hands over Requiem to Ashley for defense, and we start Grace's first long section, which is extremely comparable to how the RPD played in the Resident Evil 2 remake, I will say, being composed of a main hub area, then two separate wings that have much different feels and ways of playing. We also find Emily here, who is a little blind girl stuck behind a special door, which we need level 3 access to get into. So that only makes for a small portion of our main objective here, as the rest of the area basically consists of trying to find 3 key objects to unlock a door, as well as clearing out areas of zombies and other pests. Since we're in a general gameplay section, I finally feel comfortable bringing this up, but somehow Capcom felt it was okay to not put an FOV slider in this game at all. And I somewhat understand, since they wanted the section to be scarier and they give you the option for third person. But if you're going to give me the option to make it less scary anyway, why not letting me see more than 55 fucking degrees around me, or set the base FOV to 90 or something? It fucked me up so bad that when I was playing through this for the video, that I ended up installing a mod so I could just turn up my FOV a little bit, which ended up breaking about halfway through because of a patch Capcom decided to put out that completely fucked the modding community. But exploring this wing of the care center is full of a lot more offices, and is very clearly where the actual workers who would spend most of their time. And it actually makes for a very pretty space to look at. We also have this hulking area in this enemy you can actually kill if you have enough ammo, being this huge chef who carries a giant knife bone saw thing. You also get your first usable firearm inside the dining hall, where the service wasn't quick enough to stop these assholes from eating each other. And Grace somehow manages to break a gear off of a door, which we'll probably have to come back to use later. Finding buckets of blood, which will probably be useful later. And there's just a lot of shit you don't get to interact with in the early game, I'm realizing. But after navigating to the chairman's office and solving a small puzzle to get the key item you need to escape, being these strange clear cubes that fit into a door in the main hall, I also find a red jewel that can take us to a room that has the best part of the game: gambling. But the upgrades are cool too, I guess. This room also holds the key for the other wing, which is the patient's ward, which surely the patients can't be any worse than the staff, right? This area is a lot more cramped than the staff ward. With a lot more zombies and obstacles, you really need to change your gameplay. And considering I'm pretty fucking stubborn, this was the area where I finally started to regret choosing classic mode. The amount of times I died in this area alone made me feel like I was playing a fucking FromSoft game with the walkbacks I was making from the lobby. But this area also introduces a new system for the franchise, being blood collecting. So those blood buckets aren't useful for decoration after all, because after killing enemies, you're able to collect their blood as a resource and use it to make materials like bullets and heals. But to get those crafting recipes, you need to find blood samples around the care center and analyze them. And this system feels fine for the most part, but this also just doesn't carry over to Leon. He has the normal crafting system from the games prior, and I just can't help but think that this feels a bit pointless, especially since it just feels like it was added for fear factor, but it doesn't make the game any less scary. It just makes the game a lot more annoying now, since I have to shoot zombies in specific sections of the body when I could just shoot them in the head to progress further. It's no longer a game of preserving resources, but expending resources to get more potential resources. which felt like an issue at some points, but not enough to make me feel like it's an absolute deal breaker on the new system. But after getting my ass upstairs, I found a suspicious save station alongside the next piece, which is locked behind a little special lock that Grace apparently can't shoot with the gun she has in her fucking hands. I also found some supplies, so surely nothing bad is about to happen. So this is Chunk, our other roaming enemy, which you are able to kill in this, surprisingly enough. Which I didn't manage to, but there is an achievement for it in the game. And what can I say, but this fat fuck is so damn annoying. Since his ass takes up entire hallways when you're not directly in front of him, he just ends up roaming around some of the hallways, which at the very least, if he can't fit inside rooms because of the terrain, he just won't go in them, or even trying to break down the door, but it doesn't make it any less of a pain in the ass, which he's supposed to be, so I guess good job, Capcom. I guess I am a little biased here just because I also had died like 4 times trying to redo this section before meeting Chunk, but I'll be damned if I change my opinion to match an issue that was clearly a skill issue. Chunk was actually guarding the level 1 pass, which will allow us to get into quite a few rooms inside of the care center, as well as right past where he was is our next objective, being a dissolvent that's guarded by an annoying bitch singing and screaming, as well as a fuck ton of zombies. After taking the dissolvent back, I meet with Victor, who says he doesn't want for Grace to get hurt, which I call bullshit because I'm still in the fucking care center with all the monsters. But after Grace does a little bit of mind fuckery, you're able to finally get the next cube out of the cabinet and make your way over to anything you missed on the other side of the building, which is quite a bit. Everything we get over from the staff ward is used specifically so we can get to the area locked behind the level 2 wristband in the patient ward, including this box that has intestines in it, so I can basically reassemble a person. Don't ask about the process I had to go through to get the fucking box.
What the fuck?
But giving this guy his organs back means we can kill him again and take his wristband, which I just need to ask the logic of why the fuck Grace doesn't just unstrap the guy and take the wristband off to begin with while he's still dead. But you know what, whatever. All of this leads us to the isolation ward, where we can finally find the last cube. But we need to get this little girl to read some braille for us so we can actually solve the puzzle, which conveniently in that office we also find the level 3 wristband, so the whole plan is coming together nicely. We just need to go get her, then bring her back to the puzzle so she can get the cube out. It's not going to be that simple, is it? No, of course not. It wouldn't be enough to transport this little idiot, but we also need to defend her from hordes of zombies too. And would you believe me if I told you that instead of getting the cube, you actually got to watch Emily get kidnapped by the girl instead? But before we get to deal with that, we actually switch back to Leon, who is currently having a private session with Victor where he allows him to barely get away after managing to escape on some action movie bullshit. But after gathering our things, we find Chunk defending the shotgun for us since he's such a nice guy. But just to be real, this is the first actual boss fight in the game, which it isn't really that bad, but I didn't feel it was very clear how to get those moments where he would make a clearing on how to do increased damage. And no, I'm not talking about yellow paint. It's more I saw the areas, but it didn't feel clear how to make it so Chunk would clear them so I could actually access those areas. It almost felt like luck that he charged at me at the right times just so I cleared the fight a bit faster. But plus, when I did end up killing him, I didn't even know he died until like a minute later. I still liked the fight, but killing this fat slob didn't feel as good as I feel it could have. And it didn't have a whole lot of feedback like games before with El Gigante or even fighting Birkin in the respective remakes. But after getting through the fight, I finally got to go through the entire care center as Leon, which actually makes for a really good way to clear out the rest of the place in case you wanted to explore with Grace when you switch back to her. And since Leon just treats everyone like they owe him money, plus there's just a bunch of different cabinets you can't open as Grace around both wards, which are full of loot. After ransacking the building, the real main goal of this section is to find Victor's office to find out what the hell he's been doing here. After clearing out a bunch of zombies, we find his computer and talk to Sherry, another returning character from Resident Evil 2. And Leon finds out that he and Sherry are both infected with the T virus, but this marks the end of the Leon section as we jump back into Grace's gameplay. And my biggest issue with this system is that it feels extremely inconsistent how often you switch between Grace and Leon. The game has a fix for this later, but it feels more like a band-aid patch, and the first half of the game is mainly Grace with Leon sprinkled in, and the second half is Leon with Grace sprinkled in, which in theory should feel a lot better, but I just don't think so. I'll get into it more later, but as of right now, just understand I'm not exactly happy with the predicament Capcom has put us in, especially since this specific section of the game is easily my least favorite, because we're dealing with the girl once again in an attempt to save Emily from who for some reason is just keeping her inside of a prison cell. But the main gameplay loop of this section is grabbing these batteries and transporting them around so you can power specific sections when you need them, all while avoiding the girl who is still scared away by the lights. Which, can I say that the AI for the girl just feels so damn annoying. It doesn't really feel like a natural stalker situation. It feels very heavily skewed against the player compared to something like Jack from RE7 or even like the alien from a game like Alien Isolation. It just feels like the girl walks around the exact same area, just waiting for the player to walk through. There's like 2 sections where the girl shows up while you're actively doing the objective, and that's fine. But this area feels very fucking basic as well, besides like 2 areas. And those 2 areas being a section where you have to navigate a conveyor belt section where you need to switch the track back and forth. And in my opinion, it makes for a real good small puzzle and leads perfectly into the next section where you actually get put into a giant meat grinder and have to stay actively moving the entire time. This actually took me a couple tries since the zombies will stun you and usually you will just die if that happens. It keeps you on your toes the whole time and was a welcome challenge since Capcom was kind enough to put a save right before you enter the challenge. So I'm guessing the devs probably got fucked up just as much as I did when they were playtesting this. But after getting through this, you're pretty close to the end of the section, which is great because that means we can finally rescue Emily and get the hell out of here. And makes for a pretty intense chase since you need to run all the way from the prison cells to get to this elevator that's in the beginning of the area and finally escape. Also, the difficulty of this really depends on just how many zombies you decided to waste ammo on while playing the whole section, but getting up the elevator finally ends this and we get the last piece of the puzzle from way earlier when Emily originally got kidnapped. So now we can finally leave the care center and we actually find a helicopter pilot where surely things are going to go easy, right? We're going to get out of here in the helicopter. And the pilot tells Grace to go inside the small house to get the keys for the chopper so they can actually leave. And I actually really like this little scripted section. It's just a little puzzle room that leads you down into a classic Umbrella facility where there's a giant tank of blood and plenty of zombies in the tanks. And we also find Victor gloating that he finally found Elpis, which has been referred to as Grace quite a few times at this point, and he decides to detonate the facility. The sequence is also really cool, leading to a giant rush to run through the facility to attempt to escape to the helicopter. There's one scene where you have to run up a staircase and it's literally just flowing with blood, and it makes for such a cool scene. But this leads us to the grand escape, finally getting to the chopper, and if you really thought it would be that easy, you obviously haven't played a horror game. Which means we get to switch back to Leon for a pretty short time, leading to a tower defense section where you have to defend Grace from getting overrun by zombies with a sniper rifle. Then when she finally gets into the building, Leon can hop down, go check on her, and then there's a little small boss fight that happens, which is just basically a huge enemy arena. And there's a unique enemy that if you shoot it in specific spots, then zombies around them will mutate to become a lot quicker and a lot more dangerous. Now, as nice as it is to play as Leon more, I really don't see why the devs felt that they needed to make the switch here. It's only a 10 or 20 minute section and I honestly could have lived without it. It feels like a bump in the road since I've gotten so used to playing as Grace at this point, but we switch back to Grace for such a short time as well and find the girl once again, but at the very least this is the last time we have to deal with her, as this is basically the only boss fight Grace gets to take part in, and it's much more a puzzle than Leon's fights, forcing you to run around this small room, turning on generators to force her away from you with lights that turn on, as well as making it so we can open a giant hatch above the facility so we can melt her away. Do you have any idea just how satisfying it was to watch this fucking bitch melt away like the Wicked Witch of the West? I have never felt so happy to watch an enemy die just to be met with an extreme shift, because I forgot to mention Emily got injured in the chopper crash, and now she's dead. Simple as that. Then she mutates into a giant monster, and Leon comes down and puts her down right in front of Grace. Grace leaves Leon with Requiem and ends up finding, of all people, fucking Wesker, who hasn't shown up since Resident Evil 5 besides a small cameo in the RE4 remake. And when I finally got to this scene, I gasped in shock that we were finally going to see this asshole in action again in a game with fucking Leon, of all characters. But Wesker and Victor take Grace away to Raccoon City, where they believe she will be able to help them, which surprisingly she leaves with them, and we switch over to Leon again as he follows in chase to Raccoon City, which he obviously hasn't been back to since his first day as a rookie in the police department. Now, this section sees you in some small areas of the desolate city, but it starts out with a bang and another boss fight almost instantly with a giant spider. And I absolutely loathe this fight just because I really fucking hate spiders in real life, but gameplay wise I don't think it's really anything special. I think for a lot of people it's just going to act as a very cathartic release for not being able to kill that one spider that crawled in them when they were in bed, that they lost after getting scared and screaming as loud as possible at 4 o'clock in the morning. Not that I would know anything about that, of course. But now that we're in Leon's longest gameplay section, I really need to say this is probably the most boring section in the game. I really don't know why, but the gameplay here is just extremely dull. You're basically just trying to find parts for a detonator and have to do a whole lot of bullshit around this city to make your way to specific parts, either leading to progression to parts or the parts themselves, but in between these parts are what I really have an issue with, which is just so much combat. I get it, Capcom, it's supposed to be the merging of the different playstyles, but you all do realize the best games you've made with Leon had a lot more tactical gameplay, and your RE2 remake was made with horror in mind specifically for Leon. We don't need to feel like Chris Redfield or Jill in RE5, especially when that shit almost killed the franchise. It also didn't help that literally everything in the city is gray. I mean, for obvious reasons, the city got fucking nuclear bombed, but even the menu inside the item box, which acts as a vendor in this game, is just a gray background. It genuinely makes me angry that the legendary return to Raccoon City feels like one of the laziest sections of the game. Another issue I have is that the save system isn't consistent with Grace's gameplay. As Leon, you get to save as much as you want, which is great, but why give me the choice of the classic system? Why make me regret choosing it? Then take it away from me and get me used to how I'd like it to be, just to force me back into it as Grace later. I swear this sounds really stupid of me, but I'm asking, if you're gonna torture me, do not make me think you finally let me go just to force me back into it later. And it's not all bad here, as there are some cool set pieces, having a combat encounter that takes place in a falling building where you can shoot out glass underneath zombies to finish the encounter quicker, and another spot inside of a parking garage which is full of water, where it's completely dark besides your flashlight, making for a very eerie arena. But all of this means nothing, since the next section is a giant motorcycle chase between Leon and Victor, which wasn't what I was expecting at all. Definitely a surprise, but a welcome one at that. And this huge chase ends with Victor flying off a highway and Leon arriving back at the old RPD, which felt pretty weird for me because somehow I'm feeling nostalgic for a game that came out 7 years ago. I can't imagine how fans who have been playing since the original version of 2 feel, which unsurprisingly, it is the exact same as it was inside of the RE2 remake, even having callbacks to things that Leon did in his playthrough, specifically meaning that Leon's A scenario is actually the canon way the game plays out. And Leon finds out Wesker is inside the building with him and needs to find his way there after completing some simple puzzles on the way there. Which, again, I need to say, it feels very strange walking around a destroyed version of the RPD after all this time. I've played the remake quite a few times at this point, and I felt like I knew it like the back of my hand, but it's so refreshing seeing all the slight changes they've made so that you basically get to see everything you'd want to see again here. Like the office Leon was supposed to be working in, the STARS office, which has a fun little scavenger hunt Brad apparently set up before everything went down. You even get to use the jack in the library again to open up the path to Wesker, which leads us to a flashback sequence with Grace, where we find out that inside of the orphanage in Raccoon City was a giant operation that saw Umbrella cloning children to try and access Elpis because they believed the only reason Grace was special was because of her genetics. So they also decided to make the children unkillable, as well as making them strong enough to snap a male adult's neck like it was nothing. Very smart indeed. This all leads us to finding out that Emily is also a clone of Grace, which is quite a weird revelation at this point in the story and just kind of shows the depravity that Umbrella was willing to go through. But Leon finally confronts Wesker and they get to meet for the first time in the series, which Wesker then decides to sick another Mr. X on Leon. And I almost had a gut feeling this was going to happen, and I don't think it's bad. I actually thought it was really fun getting chased around the RPD, which is most likely going to be the last time this happens in the franchise. And this also leads to Leon getting flashbacks of his time on that night, where he got to watch a father shoot his daughter in the face. Ah, the memories. But all of this leads to Leon getting into a boss fight with the Mr. X clone, which also felt really weird. Not a bad weird, but definitely different, since the last time Leon fought Mr. X was when he was just a rookie and had such little experience. But now it feels like Leon is absolutely shitting on him here, countering his punches and just laying into him with an axe. Capcom really did a good job making this fight feel like a capstone in Leon's life, where he overcomes something that has probably terrorized him for so long as a character. After the fight, you need to go deep into the underground of Raccoon City, as Umbrella had an underground city which was specifically for housing Elpis, where you fight a bunch of monster plants and a big monster plant for a mini boss fight that doesn't take too long. But apparently this plant is actually the next iteration of the monster plants from the Spencer Mansion in Resident Evil 1. And of course the giant plant was defending the facility, which makes for an absolutely awesome place to explore. I don't know why, but I always love the portions of these games that usually get dedicated to exploring places Umbrella have made specifically just to be horrible. Like in the RE2 remake as well as the RE3 remake, this place has a little unlikable quirk, at least for me, which there is combat with humans for some reason. And I just need to say that the combat with people in this game is fucking horrendous. Thankfully, there isn't a lot of it, but what there is fucking sucks. This game really isn't built for this kind of thing, and I don't think that anyone at Capcom really thought about the fact that zombies in this game don't constantly fucking shoot at you, because if these enemies catch you lacking, you're fucking dead instantly. Which those guys fucking you up will actually lead to a legendary encounter between Leon and what most people believe to be Hunk. I also believed it to be Hunk, and I actually love this boss fight. It's basically just a knife fight between Hunk and Leon, and it actually tests your countering skills as well as your reaction time. I prefer this a lot more over not having any unique variety where you just need to shoot at the enemy and wait for their weak points to be exposed. Plus, as a moment in the franchise, it made for a legendary meeting between Leon and Hunk, especially since Hunk was also there the night Raccoon City was bombed. But after the fight, Leon finally finds Grace, who is currently being told by Wesker that the only person who can unlock Elpis is her, and not in a way that makes sense. There was no reason they made clones of Grace because they knew that there was only a password lock on the apparent bioweapon. So what the fuck was the point of making a million clones if the only reason they'd somehow know was if memories were also granted by DNA. Maybe I read the situation wrong, but this just makes Wesker, as well as the connections and Umbrella, look like a bunch of fucking idiots. This was the last ditch effort of trying to find the fucking password that the founder of Umbrella left on the system. Really? But after finding all of this out, Leon and Grace fall deep into the trash section of the facility, and Grace has to go unlock a door so they can get back to the computer and destroy Elpis, which leads to a pretty decent section with Grace where you need to stealth your way around a facility because lickers are basically just roaming around. But another objective is also clearing the way for Leon since they had both been separated. I died here a couple of times, which was annoying, but all it made me wish was that I clicked the normal save option instead of classic in the beginning. So after getting pretty deep into the facility after finding some ball keys for a weird ass door, Grace finds a computer that actually reminds her she has a floppy disk that may have the information she needs for an Elpis terminal, but it only reveals an interview her mother had with Spencer, the founder of Umbrella, and it reveals that he had actually adopted Grace and called her the hope of his world, and explained that he regretted making all of the bioweapons from Resident Evil's past. And after this, it abruptly switches back to when Grace cleared the way for Leon during the stealth section, but Leon's section is basically just clearing out rooms full of monsters, and there's a little annoying quote-unquote mechanic that is apparently a random cough that Leon will have since he's basically on the verge of death, and there's really nothing more to say about this section because it's also very short. Leon makes his way up an elevator after getting locked in a room with some zombies, then gets right to the entrance of an Elpis containment room and keels over. This leads to Grace's section where she goes and finds Leon and makes her way back into the room with Wesker, where she gives a condition that if she enters the passcode, then he must spare Leon. And this is where things get interesting, because at this point it splits into two different endings, with one being very obviously the wrong decision. So which do you think I picked? Yeah, I picked the wrong one and got to watch Leon get shot in the face. The right decision is releasing Elpis as Wesker and Victor wanted, since they were completely wrong about it being a bioweapon. It was actually a cure-all for the bioweapons that the Umbrella Corporation had made, which leads to Leon getting cured as well as Wesker, so no more teleporting around for him like an asshole. Victor sure shows him, because a little bit of sass from Wesker means that Wesker gets fucking decapitated by Victor instantaneously. This actually leads to a fight between Leon and Victor, and this is actually a really good fight, feeling a lot more close quarters and being another test of counter timing, which I didn't fucking have while I was doing this, but after you do enough damage, he'll drop a rocket launcher, and honestly, I thought in Resident Evil fashion was actually going to be the end, but nope. That's just the setup for Phase 2, which reveals that Victor is actually just another nemesis which has basic brain functions besides just saying stars over and over again. This part is much more spectacle, but makes for an absolutely legendary aura farming moment where Leon just one-hands Requiem while blasting Victor to death. Him and Grace are rescued by Chris's squad, and Grace gets to go back to a normal life in the FBI, where it's also revealed that Emily didn't actually die, and she also gets adopted by Grace. So there are happy endings all around, and we can finally get into my final thoughts on Resident Evil Requiem. Was it all worth it in the end? I think so, but there were so many moments where I genuinely believe there were better ways of doing things. Looking back, this game also really just needed to dedicate its time to just one of these two characters. Juggling between Grace and Leon felt genuinely horrendous at times and made entire sections of the game feel completely pointless and interrupted the pacing pretty badly. I absolutely hated switching to Leon for the sniper section just to switch back to Grace, and then it immediately switches back to Leon again for a couple hours. Why not just keep me on Leon the entire time and have it so Grace helps Leon beat the girl, or have it so the boss fight is actually against Emily? Since she was going to mutate anyway, then you need to defend Grace from Emily. Almost reminding the player of RE4 in the remake, like playing with Ashley. The experience as a whole, it just definitely suffers for it. I definitely don't think it helped that I got plenty pissed because I didn't realize how fucked I was going to be because of the save system, but I am really trying to not let that affect my thoughts on the game. But being honest, I think a lot of my issues span from the girl sections being egregious, as well as the Leon sections being downright dull in Raccoon City. It's really hard because I really like the game as I look at it all as a whole, but when I get down to the details, I genuinely wonder how the fuck these made it past the concept phase. Call it a skill issue, I call it personal taste, while also realizing I may have just been dog shit at the game at some points. If you're looking for my recommendation, then I would say if you're a Resident Evil fan, you've probably already played it, but if you haven't, then it's definitely worth a shot. Just go into it with some tempered expectations for some parts because it is a very mixed bag in my opinion. But I think that kind of sums up my thoughts on the game. So I really want to hear what you guys think in the comments below. And if you guys would feel so kind, then please leave a like and maybe even subscribe if you want to see more content like this. So I'll see you guys when I see you. This is Glitchy, signing off.